Good afternoon, faculty. My name is Stephen Hustedde, and I'm here today to share with you a pilot I did last spring and repeated this summer in going gradeless. And you may have heard this gradeless concept from others, and there's lots of ways to do this. I'm going to share with you how I went gradeless and the impact that it had on my students. As a young professor, I had a mentor in my friend Dr. Bill Weldon. Bill was an educational psychologist and what I considered a master teacher. And as I would meet with him, maybe over dinner, I would say, hey, let me tell you what I'm teaching my students. And he would redirect me, always with this concept of, Stephen, teaching only occurs when learning takes place. Don't tell me what you're teaching. Tell me what your students are learning and how they're learning. Another quote from Bill that always stuck with me was, ships are safest in the harbor, but they're not built for the harbor. It was the idea that we need to take risk. We need to be innovative. So, with a master's in educational media and computers, I really focused on trying to build a quality online class. I was the Blackboard administrator at ASU. I used to teach faculty how to teach online. So trying to model that in organizing a really good quality on class. There's several things I would do. Let me just step through these a little bit. So number one, I think I wanted to have an extensive syllabus. I wanted to set expectations of my students, let them know how the class would be laid out, provide really important policies in terms of grading and attendance and so forth, and communication. I want to provide them a roadmap to the course from day one. What are we going to cover the course each week? I also want to show them the videos I want them to watch each week, the associated readings, and then what are the assignments they're going to encounter each week. This again helps set some expectations and an overview of where we're going. Each week I give my students a checklist. What are we going to cover this week? What are the activities you need to do? And then finally, what are you going to turn in? What's due this week? And give them dates and keep them on track. And then all of the assignments that I give them are aligned to the student learning outcomes. I want to let them to know why we're doing this assignment. What are they going to get out of it? What's the purpose of the assignment? Then once the assignment, I give them some tips and tricks, and I give them the rubric of how I will evaluate that project. Those rubrics are all tied to the student learning outcomes for the course. And so everything is aligned to those CSLOs. I give them a spreadsheet at the beginning of the semester to keep track of their grades. It's the same spreadsheet I use in calculating their final grades. It allows them to do some what-if analysis as well. So we walk through how to use this spreadsheet. And all they need to do for each assignment, once they get feedback from me, is to come in and highlight each of the numbers to the right of each assessment. And there's a little button that they can click and it will calculate their score for them. I provide lots of videos. Again, this is an asynchronous class, so my seat time with them is asynchronous through YouTube videos that I've created. So here in the Python class, looks like I've created about 107 videos so far. Each one averages about 10 minutes in length. And again, I'll assign multiple videos each week. Very important to give our students timely, quality feedback. And so as they submit assignments, I would spend time going through their projects, and if they didn't work, finding where their errors were and reporting back to them what they needed to change to make it work. Very time consuming. I want to be available to my students through announcements, at least one a week, but usually several times a week. Through email. That's how I do most of my correspondence with students. They'll email me a problem if they have, and I'll try to answer that. And then also setting up online office hours. And you may not know that you can do this, but in Canvas, you can go to the calendar and you can set up an appointment group. And I do mine in 15 minutes, and I do a block of times that then go into the Canvas calendar, and students can sign up for those times. And I conduct these, since it's an asynchronous class, I conduct these via Zoom. I try to give my students helpful tools. So I'll give them a cheat sheet of programming syntax for the language that they're learning. So a lot of effort went in to help my students learn. And you might say, wow, that's really cool. Looks like you do a good job teaching. Well, I like to think I do, but in the last 6 semesters, as we've gone through the COVID experience, and even a little bit before that, my success rate was horrible. In my Python class, 35.2%. Over the last 6 semesters from fall 20 through fall 21, and that includes a couple summer semesters in there. I also had a huge problem with academic misconduct. And for Python, there's actually quite a few sites online that are almost literally payustodoyourpythonassignment.com. and you can submit an assignment to tutors who will write your project for you and let you then submit that. I also found that students weren't testing and debugging the way I wanted them to. They just wanted to get an assignment, turn it in, and get feedback, and hopefully earn the points they needed to pass. This didn't model the industry collaboration that takes place. Most coding is not done individually, it's done in teams. But yet I wanted to make sure my students were demonstrating that they knew the code, so I didn't let them work in teams very much. That didn't model industry collaboration. Research shows that students really stress over grades. It's one of the reasons they do cheat. And then taking into consideration what Dr. Weldon has shared with me, I wanted to change the focus from grades to learning. Quite frankly, I spent a lot of time grading projects, and it was draining for me. Over last year's winter break, I picked up a book called Ungrading, which was a series of articles and edited by Dr. Susan Bloom from Notre Dame. Early on in her book, Dr. Bloom shares of this undergrad student in her anthropology course who said, instead of focusing on getting a good grade, I focused on actually learning the material. I was less stressed out and more interested in the actual class content. Isn't that what we as instructors want for our students? So what did I change? I kept all the things I showed you before, the checklist, the videos, the assignment projects, the announcements, the cheat sheets, all that stuff, but I added 3 things. The first one came from a book I'd read a couple years ago called Teaching Naked by Jose Bowen. I had seen him at a conference, was really impressed with the way he taught, and it was really about flipping the classroom, which I've done for a number of years. But he focuses in on reflection, and he says the time for reflection and interaction is a casualty of the digital age. And one of the primary goals of higher education should be to reclaim this time. A lot of the research shows that when students reflect on their learning, it helps them learn better. And I think it also helps take that focus from the grades to learning the content. So that's what I did. I added weekly reflections. Every week I have the students turn in a document that listed the topics we covered that week and how do they think they did. Now I tied into Dr. Cyan Proctor's Journey into Space last year and gave them 4 classifications. So for each topic they would list, was it all systems go? They got this. Was the trajectory off target? Mostly good, but needed a few adjustments. Houston, we have a problem. I'm really struggling with this. Or the last one, I crashed and burned. I'm just totally lost. And all the students had to do was move the X's from one column to another column to reflect how they thought they were doing in terms of learning those topics. Then on each of the projects, I had them report back how did the project work for them. Did they get the anticipated output from the input that I asked them to enter? I wanted them to get into testing and debugging. And if it didn't work, to go back and change their code. That's what being a programmer is all about. And then I wanted a paragraph from them on how the week went. What was the most important thing they learned? Where did they struggle? What do they need help in? And that allowed me to have a much better dialogue with my students, not about their performance, but about their learning. For each of the projects, I added a video, talk them through the assignment, and then have them pause and do it on their own. But if they got stuck, I then walked them through my solution. So there was no reason a student couldn't get every single project to work if they followed my solution. And this is the process that's very similar to what we see in the coding industry, where software developers do code reviews with their teammates or with their supervisors, of walking through the code line by line, explaining how it works. That's what I did with my students. I didn't care how they learned. I wanted them to learn from doing, but I also didn't care if they learned from me, if they learned from their sibling, from their classmates, from their parents, other resources online or textbooks. I wanted them to learn and be able to accomplish the project, even if they needed a lot of hand-holding doing that. It became over an apprenticeship model for me. At the end of the semester, I have them submit a final grade request worksheet. This largely came out of Susan Bloom's book from an article by Arthur Chiaravalli. And I liked what he had done in terms of this descriptive grading process, and so I adopted it in my class. I have each student report on how they think they did on the topics that we covered over the semester. And then use that as a guide to, do they deserve an A, B, or C, or do they think maybe they need a D or W? Maybe they just didn't get it. So, but to get an A, they had to pass the final exam and they had to do a capstone project. To get a B, they had to pass the final exam. But to get a C, they didn't have to pass the final and they didn't have to do the capstone. But they did have to basically say that, yeah, I feel like I have achieved what we set out to achieve at the beginning of the semester. Now, this is what they request. If I don't agree with them, we'll have a dialogue. 28 students have gone through my Python class, both spring and summer. I've only, I think, on 3 occasions disagreed with their request. And 2 of those 3 were, I think you sold yourself short. I think you deserve a higher grade than you requested. They also have to justify on this worksheet the grade that they think they deserve. And so they have to write a narrative. So, did this make a difference? Remember that 35.2% I got the last 6 semesters? Through spring and summer, it went to 83.9% success rate. That's a game changer for me. And I really felt in the dialogues I had with my students, we had changed the focus from grading to learning. I didn't have any academic misconduct. First time in years. Because why would you pay somebody to do your assignment, or why would you take an assignment from somebody else if there's no points associated with it? And if it's okay to not get an assignment to work and to say I'm really struggling, there's no pressure. I saw students testing and debugging much more. The quality of questions I was getting from my students was much higher and much more engaging than I got in grading. Several students reported they had less stress through this approach. And the hours that I spent grading assignments was much less and much richer interacting with the students on their weekly reflections of how their learning was going. Exit survey at the end of the class. 82% of my students said they liked the gradeless approach. Here's some feedback. I liked the gradeless approach for this course because I felt as though I learned the content better and it was less stress on me to complete every assignment correctly. The instructor's code review was very beneficial because it helped me understand where I was doing things wrong instead of having to worry about having everything correct. It was my first time going gradeless. It was really good for me. Whenever I worked on assignments, I didn't feel lots of pressure to make it work on time to get a grade. This enabled me to spend enough time working through my problems in my code. Overall, I feel it helped me to learn Python at my own pace since I was able to focus on learning through assignments and not just submitting assignments. One student said this has been the most fun I've had taking a class in a long, long time. And another student said I feel like I've grown significantly through this instructor's class arrangement. If you'd like to learn more, I've written a white paper, and there's an address there that you can get to the white paper, and there's also a QR code, so you can take your phones and snap that, and that'll allow you to download the white paper. And then I also created a video for my students. I always want to communicate to my students why I'm doing things. Why am I doing this gradeless approach? I didn't know what to expect the first semester I did this. So I created a video going into that experience of here's why I'm doing this, and this may or may not work, but let's give this a shot. And you can watch that video through YouTube. And again, there's a QR code that will take you there. Questions and comments?